Welcome to another episode of Underground Railroad Radio. This is your host, Brother Rich, and I have the honor to be on the radio today with none other than Dr. Ashra Kwesi. Welcome to the program, brother.
Thank you, brother. It's an honor to be on your program, Education for Liberation.
Indeed. Now, I know before we get into the show, Dr. Kwesi, I know you're going to be in New York Sunday, November 22nd. So I want all the listeners to know that. I'm going to put the fly up on the screen. Sunday, November 22nd, Dr. Ashra Kwesi will be in New York at Nicholas, Brooklyn at 570 Fulton Street near Flatbush Avenue. The title, Dr. Kwesi, I'm looking at the flyer, and the title says Ancient African Spirituality, the Origin of Christianity and the Birth of the Black Christ. Can you tell the people real quick, Dr. Kwesi, what can they expect from this lecture that you're about to do in New York?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to give many thanks to King Simon for putting on this community. Peace be upon him, as Bobby Wright would call it. That's what it is, a community. And this is a subject that has gone on 35 years that I have lectured on this subject, going back to do research and giving respect to my teacher, Grand Master Teacher, and that is Dr. Yosef Inyakinen, that we affectionately know as Dr. Ben. I started traveling with him back in 1981. I actually met Dr. Ben back in 1973 at Long Beach State, and he gave a very powerful lecture on the origin of religion and also African history. And at that time, I was in the political movement and fighting the Gestapo beast, the LAPD at that time. But at that time, I realized that our history and our black divinity was always represented from a European perspective. So, of course, hearing Dr. Ben, and it was a profound lecture he gave that day, and I asked him after the lecture, can you prove what you're saying here today? And he said, young man, not only can I prove it, but I can take you back and show you, take you back to Africa and show you. That's the first time someone told me they could actually show me. But he said, above all, we need young people like you to go back and do the field research. So that was a dream, and he walked away. Well, that was in 1973, and in 1981, I made that journey with him, never knowing that I would actually spend 14 years in Kemet with him, helping him conduct his education tours at that time, and learning from the reliefs and the temples right there in Kemet that is now called Egypt today, and as well as the Sudan, going to Madaway and Naga, Maserat, and those ancient sites there, and 200 pyramids there, and then also in the highlands of Ethiopia. And in fact, was with him when I returned back with him and he visited his family up in Gondar, he himself being a Beta Israel, or his family background being a Hebrew. So that started my journey. Now 35 years nonstop, we came back to Africa, researching and documenting what our ancestors wrote on the books in stone. So when we say ancient African spirituality, we're talking about the ancient spiritual stories that our ancestors told going back countless thousands of years. And the fact that we're going into this season, actually going into the winter solstice, and literally, which is the birth of the sun, our ancestors told stories around this whole cosmic movement. Here, this whole astrotheology, or spiritual stories that were taken from the cosmos, stories around solar events, around the suns, stories told around the stellar event, the stars, as well as Lunar, the moon, that took on various spiritual personalities of ancient Kemet. Now, when we go and look at these early spiritual stories in the ancient African spirituality, we have to go back to the world's first holy city, and that is not in Jerusalem, and it's not in Mecca. The earliest recorded holy city would be an area called Aptu or Abydos that we take our groups every year, and I first made that journey with Dr. Ben in 1981, and going up into the temple of Setiwan, who honored this sacred city because this is the birth as well as the death and resurrection of a spiritual neter, or divine one, called Sar, who the Greeks refer to as Osiris. And there's a sacred shrine called the Batasoka Shrine, telling of the world's first holy birth, telling of the world's first immaculate conception. The story is told that here we have in the Zeptepi, or the first time of creation, we see the first man and woman created in the African spiritual story. Now, I know most of us are familiar with Genesis and Adam and Eve, but thousands of years before Genesis or Adam and Eve's story, there's the story of Asar and Aset, who are created, by the way, simultaneously. There was no rib taken from Asar to make Aset. In the spiritual story, They were created simultaneously. In that story, being an evil brother, yes, evil being player hating going on, we see that Set kills Asar. It's a Set who takes the seed in this Patasso prescribed on this particular belief. Here she takes the seed from Asar and she's now impregnated. Here we see the world's first virgin birth story. These books in stone tell of these early stories where down through the millenniums, others came and plagiarized many of these stories, copying them, and it becomes part of the Western religion, specifically known as Christianity as we know it today. So when we look at the ancient African spirituality, we're looking at the stories that our ancestors told long before the Western world was even in existence. And some of these early Africans who tried to keep the story alive, about time the Greeks and the Romans we're talking about thousands of years after Asar and Aset, when they came in as invaders, specifically the Greeks who came in. We're talking about Alexander, the second, who came in around 332 BC. After his death, this is when his generals took over, Ptolemy, first known as the Sutter. Now, we look at this is where they started Greeks being in Kemet for 300 years, long enough to copy many stories that our ancestors told for countless thousands of years. And in the story of Asar, Aset, and Naru, here they worshiped this ancient story. And when we see another group of Europeans who came on the scene, we're talking about now the Romans who defeated the Ptolemies, and they're on the scene and they're eagerly worshiping the Madonna. They're worshiping the Black Madonna. This Black Madonna is Aset. They carried her throughout their empire at that time. We're talking about Gaul, which would be France. We're talking about throughout all their empire, the Germanic tribes. When one goes to Europe today, and many people speak of the Black Madonna, they speak of the Black Madonna, but they don't speak of the origin, the prototype, the beginning of this Black Madonna, and how this Black Madonna got to Europe is through the Romans who carried her throughout Europe, what is known as the Herculean worship of the goddess Aset, who the Greeks refer to as Isis. So when you see the Black Madonna throughout Europe, this is the origin from the Romans who carried her throughout their empire. But as another group of Europeans who, after the Roman Empire fell, we're talking about the Byzantine Roman Christians, Theodosius, who around 380 AD, that now makes the Byzantine Roman Christian religion part of the European religion at this time. This is the beginning of Catholicism. Now, when we look at the Madonna and Child, that was a set that was carried, as I said, by the Romans throughout their empire, now she is now turned into Mary. There are many of these conferences before Theodosius, they took place, and these conferences were called ecumenical conferences. These conferences that they had, like the Conference of Nicene in 325 AD, as other conferences of Ephesus, 431 AD, all of this was about de-Africanizing the ancient African spirituality and the formulating of these ecumenical conferences. God had nothing to do with this. These were European religious gangsters who got together and through their thievery of ancient African spiritual stories that they took from the Alexandria Library. Now, the Alexandria Library is very important because when the Greeks who plundered the temples, that Dr. George G.M. James talks about in his book, The Stolen Legacy, when Aristotle, who plundered the temple for Alexander, where did all that material, where did all that sacred knowledge that was taken from Ipidasut, called Karnak today, that was taken from ancient temples of Ipirasut, called Luxor today, the temple of Aset, called the temple of Isis today, the temple of Haru, all these temples up and down the Nile, these Greeks plundered and housed that knowledge in the Alexandria Library. This became the knowledge that Europeans were able to copy ancient African spirituality, ancient African spiritual stories, and eventually they formulated into the Western version of Christianity. When one thinks about Western version of Christianity, most people think about Jerusalem. Most people think about these places, but Christianity did not start in Jerusalem. It started right there at Alexandria, Egypt. Why Alexandria, Egypt? Because that's where they housed a lot of the sacred knowledge that they took from the ancient temples. What was some of the profound knowledge that they copied, and that was based off of the salvation and resurrection. The foundation of Western version of Christianity is based off of salvation and resurrection. That goes all the way back to Asar that I talked about in the Patah Soka Shrine, the world's first holy city, where he resurrected from the dead. Here we see the whole mystery play, the salvation and resurrection, the details of Asar's resurrection through his holy child, Haru, who Aset gave birth in immaculate conception. Now, to keep these stories alive, our ancestors told these stories in the stars. That was part of their astrotheology, meaning that the sun would never change its course. During the time as we slowly start to move into the winter solstice at December the 21st, the sun is born at December the 25th. Our ancestors personified Haru as the sun. So the birth of the sun at December the 25th, our ancestors saw that Haru would be born again. On the temple of Aset, here our ancestors are giving praise to a star. That star is called Sabo Septa. Sabo Septa, who the Romans called Ceres and the Greeks called Sothis, that is the star that told our ancestors that the helical rising of that star that still happens, I go out in my backyard every winter to see it, that is the brightest star that rises that told them that Haru, would be born again. He would be born from his mother, the Virgin. Now, what would be the constellation for that Virgin? That was Virgo. As the sun comes down into Virgo, down into the winter solstice, symbolically, it was looked at that Haru was born of a virgin from his mother, Aset. That told us that our ancestors looked and saw that the teardrop of Aset caused the flooding of the Nile, but the rising of that star, it told them that the holy child would come back. And that holy child was called the Ka, or the spirit of Haru, would come back. These are the stories that our ancestors told. So when one goes to the Yule tide, that we see, and the Yule tide literally means the birth of the sun, we could not see the story because Europeans, during the time when Theodosius created the white supremacy Christianity that it became in 380 A.D., and he, Theodosius, and also others came and chiseled out the Madonna and Child that I show our groups every year. Why did they chisel her out? Because they were plagiarizing that spiritual story. So when one looks at the Yule tide, we got caught into white idolatry. White idolatry is the worship of white images. We could not see the cosmos or the cosmology in it. One has to ask, why is that sun always behind that European image of Mary's head? That is the sun and the constellation of Virgo. One has to ask that European image of this Jesus that they created at the Conference of Nicene, who is actually Serapis, who was started by the Ptolemies, as I will go back real quick to explain that, where the Ptolemies wanted to be worshipped on the throne, so they tried to trick the Kemetic Africans of the Nile Valley by turning Asar into Serapis. This Serapis, when the Romans came on the scene, the Byzantine Romans, they turned Serapis into this Serapis Jesus that we have been worshiping ever since. But when we get back to that whole Yule tide and the cosmology and the images and representation, we could not see it because Europeans put their own images in it. One would ask, what about the Magi, or that they refer to as the three wise men? That is no other than the constellation of Orion. The constellation of Orion consists of 7 stars with 3 stars in the belt of Orion that are, 2 of them are perfect alignment, one's out of alignment, pointing directly to the star Sabo Septa that only happens at December the 25th, and it happens right now. One can go in the backyard in December the 25th and see Sabo Septa representing as Aset and Orion representing as Asar. That told them that the spiritual mother and father would come back. And that would be the story that would last for eternity. But Europeans took these stories of our ancestors and put themselves in it that literally represents the cosmos. Spiritual Medu-Neter names, such as Murray. Murray means love, Now, it is Het-Heru in the temple of Enit-Neter, or Het-Heru, in a place called Enit-Neter or Dandara today. Here, this is the surrogate mother of Haru. This is the surrogate mother of Haru that is symbolized as her Zoop type is a cow. Now, she's there with cow's ears. Sometimes she's looked at as a cow. And why a cow? Because the cow symbolized the great mother. But she also was Marie, or meaning love, because Heru represented love. And when you see the reliefs and the temples and the monuments and the tombs, you see the Heru king. There you see the black divinity on the tombs is painted that I show with visual documentation through the lecture. There you'll see the Heru king over, you'll see the Heru over the Heru king. Now the question that one's got to ask, through our own critical analysis of looking at the Western version of Christianity, during this time of the year we're going to be seeing images and representations of the birth of this European white Serapis Jesus. You're going to see a cow in the manger. Now, in Kemet, they looked at the animals and they said, well, they were in the animal worship. It was not animal worship, it was the Zoop type, depending on what that particular animal personified. For instance, in the case of Heru, her symbol was the cow. Just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're represented as various animals and Zoop types and so forth on the church. That is the animal representation, or whether the President of the United States be the eagle, that is the representation. But 2,000 years from now, people can come back and say that's animal worship. But back to that whole story, when we see that Heru, her symbol was Marie, meaning love. They took from Marie, the Medu Neter symbol, okay, that means love, a name that means love, and made it Mary. So Mary, at the conference of Ephesus, here we see a set was de-Africanized and called this Mary. But we have not studied the ancient Kemetic spiritual stories because here Kemet was demonized and vilified by the church, okay, when it started, because it feared that the unlocking of this ancient African spiritual knowledge, then it would reveal the sacred secrets that African people laid down thousands of years ago. In fact, during the time of the Inquisition period, there was such a fear that anyone talking about the sacred knowledge of Kemet, they were burned at the stake for heresy laws. All right, that was the fear of ancient Kemet. But as time goes on, especially today, psychologically, the fear is that you will burn in hell if you study that, as they call it, that pagan heathen religion. Okay, these are the negative connotations that were put on Kemet psychologically for people to stay away. So psychologically, they make you burn in hell. These are the spiritual stories that our ancestors told, and especially around this time of the year. This is the time of the year that we have got to investigate because we're caught into white idolatry. The most vicious form of enslavement of a people is spiritual enslavement, when the enemy becomes the deity and the spiritual subconscious of your mind. But we've got to come with documentation. We've got to come, as Dr. Ben told me years ago, I can take you and show you. And I know everyone can't make it to Kemet, so I come with visual documentation and do a comparative analysis, and through their own critical analytical analysis, one can look at and see the comparisons and see without question that someone came and stole this knowledge. Even if one is a Christian, if one is a Christian and they're black, at least research the black theology of Christianity. And if one was to research the black theology of Christianity, they would find that the early Gnostics, okay, who were the knowers of this spiritual truth, who were the conduits, so to say, during the time of the Romans and during the time of the ancient Kemetic knowledge when the Romans were robbing a lot of things, okay, and destroying a lot of Kemet, shutting down the temples, they understood where this knowledge came from. But one of their main critiques or criticism of the Romans, okay, and the Roman Catholicism was that they were destroying the spiritual idea of the Christ. The Christ had nothing to do with a man. It had nothing to do with a white Serapis Jesus, or any time we see a white Jesus, that is Serapis, or the representation. So what did they see? They saw that the idea of the Christ that they call the Charis, that goes back to the Ka. The Ka is the spirit, okay, which generally shown in the Medu Neter with two arms up. On all the tombs in the reliefs, you'll see the Ka in the tomb showing the spiritual body. The Romans did not understand spiritual things. They took it literally, whereas our ancestors taught that it's the spiritual body that will leave the physical body, but it's the physical body that will stay on the earth. but it's the spiritual body that will rise up. And a term that they refer to as the Ba, meaning the soul, and the Ka is the spirit. It's that Ka that the Gnostics call the Kares, to rising up of our Kares. The Romans feared that teaching of the Gnostics because the Gnostics says to rise up your Ka, you would fight against oppression. The Romans feared that because they were creating a new religious world order. And in this new religious world order, they to enslave humanity through the deification of this Serapis Jesus, that they would look outside themselves to a picture and not inside themselves to rise up to fight against tyranny and oppression. So if the people understood that every time that a black child is born, that is a black Ka, that is, or as we interpret it today, as a black Christ. That is the Christ. The spiritual representation is the Christ. The spirit that's in us has nothing to do with a human flesh or anything of that nature. When we look at the tyranny that's taking place on African people today, shooting us down in the street, and we see that every time that happens, we have an African family will come on the television set, and then they will give forgiveness to the perpetrator of the white cop or the white boy that will shoot one of their family members down the street. That's the teaching of that Roman Christian, to make one docile, okay, to make one submissive. Whereas the true teaching, they would rise up their Ka, they would rise up their Kares, they would rise up their Christ and fight against tyranny and oppression. And that's what the Romans feared. So in the presentation, considering that this time of the year, when many black folks start to go in their closets and get little plastic white figurines and little plastic white babies and little plastic white angels for white idolatry, as we will see in the yards, especially down here in the South, and I know many places in the North, you'll see black families with white, as they call it, holy family, and a white baby, plastic baby, in their yard. You'll see the halo around his head that represents the sun at December the 25th. You'll see that star above the baby's head. That is Sebel-Siptah. That is the star that our ancestors gave praise to countless thousands of years ago. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about and understanding the origin that we are a deeply spiritual people, Brother Rich. And it's only until we go back and turn back the pages of time, only can we see who we are. And we're talking about going through the books in stone. We're talking about not coming to believe the information, but to think about the information. That's one of the fears that the church had, that if people start thinking, then they can start to having critical analysis. So they tell you just to have faith, okay? Don't, and have belief. But we know the word belief and the etymology and the roots of words that you go to the Webster's Dictionary, right below the word belief, there's a word called belie, okay? B-E-L-I-E. They just took the F off of it, okay? And it says that to distort and to misrepresent. And that's what we've gotten is a distortion and distortion and a misrepresentation of ancient African spirituality. And these are some of the things that we're going to be dealing with, and letting the visual documentation and letting the ancestors speak through the books in stone that our ancestors taught for countless thousands of years, Brother Rich. I don't want to hog the whole show. Maybe you want to bite off of some of that.
Well, that was magnificent. I'm glad you broke it down like that. I was talking to a Christian brother, a good brother. He's curious into the information with ancient Kemet. The one thing that he did tell me that one of the reasons why he doesn't want to leave Christianity alone is because he goes to church often every Sunday, but he catches the Holy Ghost. So he feels as though that spirit is real. How can you tell me this ain't real when I'm catching the Holy Ghost calling on Jesus' name, God in the name of Jesus? So what would you have to say to a person that feels as though they feel that spirit when they're in that Christian church, so they don't want to leave that and go to look at anything as far as Kemet is concerned?
Well, first, Brother Rich, we are naturally a spiritual people, African people. Without black people, without African people, religions would not even exist. All right, African people are the first people from their empirical observation of Mother Nature, known as Mother Nature. Okay, they understood the divine force of the universe. So that's a natural, innate spirit. Now, if I can use the analogy like this, if one bakes a cake, all right, you can put, the cake is there, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And once the cake is made, people generally do, they put icing on the cake, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So if one put a chocolate icing on it, it's a chocolate cake. If you put a white icing on it, then you see that's what they put on it. They put a white supremacy Christianity over our African spirituality.
Good analogy.
Okay, so that brother is associating that natural innate spirit, okay, that he refers to as the Holy Ghost, which is in fact is the Ka, the natural spirit, okay, that's naturally a part of us, all right. When one goes to King Tutankhamun's tomb, there you see the Sim priest raising up, okay, King Tutankhamun, okay, for him to see again in the spiritual life, not this life. You hear the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, they took these things from ancient Kemet, okay, and associated with the Serapis Jesus to make him see again, talk again, not in this life, but the spiritual realm. And there we see Asar in his black divinity. Yes, the spiritual black representation of the divinity always shown as jet black, showing Asar. There he's coming one with his Christ. So here you have an effect as one would call the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit in the opening of the mouth ceremony right there in King Tutankhamun's tomb, painted over 3,000 years ago. So of course his association, okay, with that has been through Christianity. That's the only association he has. We don't have, unfortunately, Brother Rich, we don't have any institutions to teach about our African spirituality. Unfortunately, we don't have that. Keep in mind, we've only been out of slavery 100 and some odd years, all right? And so we're still in a form of mental enslavement today. And in fact, in some cases, it's the worst form of enslavement. And the worst is when the enemy has become the deity in the spiritual subconscious of our mind. When most people say Jesus, you know a lot of people see, black folks see a white Jesus in their mind because they planted that deep in the psychic of our people. Okay, the church was there on the plantation. There was always a Negro preacher, okay, who was taught by the master how to preach to our people, and he was always there making sure that he would teach a slave theology. So, of course, a brother who, if he was to study and take time out and start to study his own innate, natural, spiritual self, and going back to his ancestors, first of all, he would be shocked. He would be shocked to see that many of the stories that he's been taught in Christianity were stories that are already documented on temples and tombs thousands of years before a Western version of Christianity was even in existence, especially once he starts to do his own comparative analytical analysis and see without question, especially for people who travel back with us, and even some ministers who've traveled back with us, okay, who gasp when they go back and see some of the release to see how these stories were literally copied directly from Kemet. And one has to ask, why would they frantically, as you go to the Temple of Aset and you see the Madonna and Child, but why is she chiseled out? When Theodosius and Justinian in the 4th and 6th century AD, why did they chisel her out? Because at this time they were copying these spiritual stories. Why did they shut these temples down? These temples were under the sand. They were only dug out during the turn of the century only to make tourist dollars, but not to tell the truth. Not to reveal the truth a Western version of Christianity came from, where its ideas came from. Okay, so that's the importance of having the proof right there. I mean, there's no place like it on the planet Earth. You don't have monuments like this, especially dealing with the Western version of Christianity, Western civilization, in fact, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all the religions. That's why there should be fighting among ourselves who are African Christians, African Muslims, okay, and African Hebrews, because without African people, these exist in the first place. In fact, without the fallopian tube of the Nile, I call it the fallopian tube of the Nile coming out of the interior of Africa, we wouldn't even have humanity on the planet Earth. So not only did we give birth to humanity, Europeans recognized that. They recognized the anthropology. They recognized the leakies who let it all leak out when they were digging in inner Africa around Anatolia and Tanzania and the Abai and also the Hadar Valley of Ethiopia. But they don't tell you that the fact that even their Western civilization and religion, these ideas were copied when they came in as plunderers and plundered the temples like many others even before them, whether we're looking at the Assyrians, the Persians, the Hyksos, the Arabs, and many others. Okay, Arabs coming in 641 AD, first coming in as mercenaries to fight the Romans. But of course, if you're going to have a mercenary to fight for you, because Kemet is already very, very, very old, all right, Muhammad Ali being a bad brother during his day, okay, I'm talking about the boxer, but now he's an old man. Anybody can take him. Well, that was like Kemet. It couldn't defend itself from these invasions that were coming in, because by the time they came in, Kemet was already very, very old. But what the Europeans saw, what the Arabs and Asians and others saw, they saw the black divinity on the temples and tombs. And through that black divinity, this is what they took away from us. We have not been able to see ourselves in a divine spiritual representation in the angelic realm. When we see a Asar who is Lord of the perfect black, even the fact that we say Amen at the end of our prayers, we have no idea that the fact that the Amen that we say at the end of our prayers was here, this spiritual deity or God was taken up out of Kemet by the Greeks, and they worshipped him as Jupiter, all right? And then as the Byzantine Romans came on the scene, Amen became part of their prayer. And we have no idea when every time we end our prayer, it says Amen. Now, Amen was always represented in an anthropomorphic or human form. So first of all, let me say the concept of God is beyond our comprehension, Brother Rich. So they used Amen as a human representation, but Amen was jet black that represented the invisible spirit that's in all of us, the invisible spirit that permeates throughout all the universe. Now, I find it interesting that even if one was to go to Timothy chapter 6, verse 16, they talk about in this verse, it says, who alone has immortality dwelling in unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see, to whom be the honor and everlasting power. Amen. Didn't I say Amen represented the invisible spirit? And they say whom no man has seen or can see. They already knew that. Now we've got astrophysicists are telling us now about dark matter and visible energy.
Right.
What did these Kari-Hebs, as they were called, priests, what did they know thousands of years? This was the spiritual knowledge that they knew. So they took that dark matter, that dark energy, and here they anthropomorphized that dark energy and that dark matter in an anthropomorphic image as Amen. That we still say at the end of our prayers, Amen. Nobody can deny that. But because of white idolatry and the worship of Europeans as God and white angels and images, this spiritual enslavement has had us now in a mental, psychological incarceration. They have circumscribed our circumference to think within their diameter, and we know nothing outside of that. So the things I'm talking about become very strange and alien to most black folks. In fact, we are so old, Brother Rich, that we are Alzheimer's people now. We have forgotten everything. But the temples and tombs are there. They're there for a reason. On the African continent, right there in Kemet. They're not mystical places. They are real places. Let's look at the temple of Ipit-Asut, called Karnak today. You can put the Vatican down inside that temple and go looking for it. The Pantheon in Rome, you can put it down inside that temple, or the Parthenon in Greece, down inside that temple. Also the Notre Dame, down inside that temple. But even the Western churches, let's let architects speak to us. Can the architectural structures speak to us as well? Yes. The Western church, architectural design, there came from the temples of ancient Kemet. When Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop revealed that information in his works, and he talked about the temple of Puraset, there in Aswan that I've been taking groups there for over 3 decades. There we show that architectural design of that church where people gasped, of that temple where people gasped to see where the church got its design from. So when you go to Notre Dame and you see the design of that church as well as other Western churches and see where the very design of the Western church copied from the temples of Kemet with the 2 high pylons in the front of the temple. Or how about the Tekenu, that they call obelisks, is a symbol of resurrection and transformation. That becomes the steeple of the church. That becomes the Washington Monument. That becomes all the symbols in the cemetery, symbolizing resurrection when you see those tekanus all in the cemetery. So Africa and African spirituality speaks to us through everything. So when we see that in France, where they still have the procession of the Black Madonna, that is a sect where that shrine, where they carried her shrine out from that holies of the holies. But right now, we're about to go into the worship of many of our people will be going into the worship of this white Mary and Serapis Jesus. Here, our mother, our black mother, from her micro-universe, her womb gave birth to us. And now, here, and breastfeeds us. And now they put a white female up in front of us and tell us that's the mother of God. This is spiritual enslavement, Brother Rich. And that's, in some cases, I say, is that why many of the brothers want a white female? Because they think this is the closest they get to God, that they having sex with God's mother.
Right. Right.
So again, but we're not coming to. All we want is for people to think. Okay, especially at this time of the year is critical. This time of the year, it becomes the thorough indoctrination of Western version of Christianity on the psychic of black folks. I know there's a thing out there, and they're talking about how they're trying to shut down, we should boycott Christmas. I mean, well, first of all, if you're not educating people about these holidays and what they really mean, okay, especially the spiritual stories that were stolen from African people, then of course we're going to break them from going out getting the new trinkets of today. It was the trinkets of yesterday through the Ma'afa that got us into what we're into, how we got here. But we're going to break that. We're going to break that Black Friday, as they call it, from us stampeding each other, okay, to go out to get these trinkets. Only until we educate, okay, and through that education give inspiration and motivation, okay, to make the longest journey that you can make in your life, and that's the journey into yourself. Only until we start to do that. But just to tell the people to boycott Christmas, that's not going to mean nothing. But all those symbolisms behind the holiday, okay, equally came out of their dramatic tribes and so forth. People will cut down half the forest, the pine trees, okay, putting in their house. That's a dramatic a tree that the dramatic tribes had. They worshiped that tree. It symbolized Thor, because all of nature became barren but that pine tree. So they worship that tree. So they still worship that tree even to this very day, with the whole idea of the pine tree that they have. That very star that they put on top of that pine tree, that is the star of Subal Septa. Okay? Mm-hmm. They got the whole Santa Claus rituals and all this stuff, okay, that they will have our babies putting them on a white man's lap. That's next month. That's coming up. All right? And here this is nothing but Santa Claus. The nickname for Santa Claus is Saint Nick. Even in Webster's Dictionary, Saint Nick, they said that is Webster's Dictionary says that is the devil, mm-hmm. according to Webster's Dictionary. So all this symbolism and all this stuff that they got us in, Brother Rich, and so again, it's we have to get our people to think. They keep us with things to do, so we don't have time to think. And once we start to reveal this information, not only will it be an inspiration, okay, to want to know, but then one would not want to just go out here and give up all their money and run out and put their children on a white man's lap in these malls. I think Wisconsin has banned the children from putting on the white Santa Claus lap because they found out that all the pedophiles came out and they were following the children. So they stopped it in Wisconsin. Now, I don't know if they picked it back up again. I don't know. But a couple of years ago, they said they were going to stop it because that's when all the pedophiles come out. But
you know, Dr. Kwesi, and I know a lot of people, brothers in particular, that know not all the information that you're saying right now, but know a good amount of it to know the truth about Christianity and the fact that it's a plagiarized version of Kemet. But yet still, when I see them, we have this thing, the brothers like to wear chains around their neck, and they call it the Jesus piece, where they have Jesus on the cross or just the head of Jesus. So I ask, damn, brother, why do you wear that? And I always get the same answer, Dr. Kwesi. Yeah, I know that information is true, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what color God is because God is a spirit. So a lot of people still feel as though, with everything being said, it's still all right to wear white Jesus or white God because the higher you go up in the spirit, in this spiritual thing, you don't see color the higher you get. You get what I'm saying? What would you say to that?
Well, again, if you don't see color, then why they got a white Jesus hanging off their chest and all these other things? Because, they may say they know Kemet. Some people, they read Kemet as a fad. It becomes a hobby, but it doesn't become a spiritual connection, all right, because it's just a surface thing, okay? Maybe they picked up a couple books and they read it, okay? We do know that we make a transformation on brothers and sisters when they go back with us. Okay, they go through a transformation. There's no way that they can continue to practice even the Christians who come with us. They start to look at it from at least a black divinity, a black spiritual representation. I mean, when you can't see your own black divinity, then you are in spiritual enslavement. You don't find no other people talking about it's a spirit. The white Christians don't talk about, God is a spirit. No, they show you a white Jesus up there, all right? That's what they show you. White supremacy Christianity is based off of the fact that when we see things like in Psalms chapter 2, verse 8, ask of me and I shall give thee the heathen for thy inheritance and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. That's why the Jesuits went all over the world. That's the militia of Rome, converting people in the Western version of Christianity and creating this white idolatry, knowing they would be in spiritual enslavement. And as Jomo Kenyatta said in his book, they gave us the Bible and told us to pray. When we opened our eyes up, they had the land and we had the Bible. So again, as long as you can get a Negro into a hypnotic state and say it's about the spirit, and all this type of thing, if he understood the fact that the cross is an ancient African symbol, so if he understood that cross is a corruption of the Romans, that story of Constantine supposed to saw Jesus in the image of the cross coming out the sky. No, Constantine went to Kemet and saw the cross on the temples, and that cross was called the Amsu. The Amsu represented a spiritual resurrection that the Romans didn't understand. As I said earlier, it represented a spiritual resurrection. All right, they took it literally, and the cross represented that spiritual resurrection. All the mummies or cots, okay, they all had that symbol of the Amsu or the cross over the mummy. That's why you see this European Serapis Jesus mummified, because that idea of mummification came out of Kemet. So again, this is what they still know. That's why the Catholics say, give me your child from 1 to 7, you can have them back. So the indoctrination of a Negro who would still run around with the images and symbols and representation of white supremacy Christianity and try to justify it, well, that's why the Catholics say, give me your child from 1 to 7, you can have them back. They know that indoctrination is thorough at that early age. Until one goes and starts to go on and make the longest journey that they can make in their life, and the longest journey they can make in their life is the journey into themselves. And that's what most of us, through that ma'afa, that we don't want to do. Why? Because we've been taught to hate that self. We've been taught to hate that black divinity. We have not wanted to make that journey. When we see anything represented as black, we look at it as the negative things that Europeans have indoctrinated us with. As I always say, you like a devil's food cake and angel's food cake. That thing was indoctrinated deep in us at a very, very early age. Okay? So that person who may say, oh, yeah, I know that about Kemet, but I'm still waiting. No, they're still looking at the enemy as the deity. So when the enemy becomes the deity in the spiritual subconscious of your mind, you're still in spiritual enslavement, the worst form of enslavement. Mm-hmm. When they went and brought an image of God, the slave master brought his image to represent God in the psychic of the slave. That's the worst form of enslavement. If the Indians want Krishna, which is still a story that was carried there by the Kari-head priests, okay, that is a story of a Set. And Krishna, here we see the story, was born of immaculate conception from his mother, Javiti, okay? But those image and representations are in Indian's image for Indian divinity. If we see that Buddha, and even though that Buddha started in India, when it spread on further east, okay, and you see the Asians, okay, they also took that Buddha and they took that Buddha and they made that Buddha look like who? Looks like them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Here you see, because they are looking at that representation as their divinity. You see God in your own divinity. If you can't see God in your own divinity, you will not have the power to ever raise yourself up. Because that power of that God powers is called today by that name, okay, or that Amen spirit that our ancestors called it, okay. That has to go, you have to see that in your own spiritual representation. That's why people will fight to the end to maintain their own image of their God. Because that's them.
Right.
We're the only people that will try to say anything and have any image representing God other than ourselves.
Wow, that's deep.
So
now,
okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
No, go ahead, brother. You dropping it.
No, go ahead. I've been talking a while. I'll let you answer the question. No.
Well, I don't want you to give too much away because I know you got the lecture coming up.
Oh, it's impossible to give it all away because the pictures, the visual documentation, it's impossible to take people through these temples by talking.
Oh, right.
But we can take people on a journey. If the people don't mind, now I know people sit in front of their living room and go and take that journey in front of the live vision. Mm-hmm. All right, and if we can watch television, then we can come out and start to see this. And I'm not saying to come to believe it, but to think about it. So we don't have that. You know what? I'll come with the visual documentation, and one can see it for themselves. And you know we're honored that King Simon, who has had this presentation that I'm bringing at critical times. In these critical times, he had it during the time of the resurrection, okay, of Christianity a couple of years ago. So it's good that we're having it this time, during the time of the winter solstice. So Europeans are not going to, they're not going to tell you we're not going to celebrate Christmas this year. I've been doing this lecture for 35 years. I don't have enough lifetimes. I need 100 more lifetimes because Europeans, white folks, are always going to celebrate these holidays. They're going to indoctrinate us with these images through these holidays. Okay? They know that this is the time of the year. There's a meltdown on our psyche. And I know it's rough. I mean, even myself, I tell brothers and sisters, you know, I'm driving down the street and Nat King Cole comes on and starts singing Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. And the ancestors got to go, Kwesi, get yourself together. I mean, I understand, brothers and sisters. This is a rough time.
Nat King Cole, come on.
It's a meltdown, brother. It's a meltdown.
Oh, man.
So, you know, I mean, it's a time that was, you know, that we've all went through that early period. As I said, and the Catholics said, give me your child from 1 to 7, you can have them back. So it's that early years, brother, when our family and all that body coming together. But, you know, and that's why it's very hard, you know. Mm-hmm. But what we're trying to do, you know, is to open up and to unlock. Peace be upon him, as Dr. Richard King said in his book, The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. We're talking about unlocking that African ancestral genetic library, unlocking that African ancestral genetic memory bank. Okay. That's why, you know, as I hate to say it, we're so old, we're coming to Alzheimer's people. We've forgotten everything. Okay. And a lot of that has been through the Ma'afa, through the enslavement, okay, through the indoctrination, okay, of white supremacy Christianity, the white supremacy Western civilization, and on and on and on. So when we see our babies, okay, like the brother a couple of years ago in the yard right down the street from me, I'm going down the street and here he's standing there with his son, his baby, his black child in his arms, and he's got this white plastic family down in the yard. So I had to stop to see what was going on. So I said, excuse me, brother, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm teaching my son that this is the Son of God. And he pointed down to the ground, showing the little plastic white baby down on the ground, okay, with the little white father and mother. And I said, you mean this little white baby on the ground, that's you tell him that's the Son of God? He said, yes. I said, wait a minute, hold up, brother. Your baby, your son is the Son of God. He is the Son of God. Our ancestors called him the Sarah. I said, the idea of the Son of God came from our ancestors. I dare you say something like that. That's heresy. Mm-hmm. See, this is spiritual enslavement where he would rather see a plastic white thing, okay, a plastic white baby. He had a pillow for him and everything else down on the ground, and don't accept his own black child as the Son of God. Until we start to see our own babies and tell them that they are the son of God, and tell our daughters that they are the Sitra, the daughters of God, we'll forever be in spiritual and psychological enslavement, which is the worst form of enslavement, as I'll say it again, when the enemy becomes the deity in the spiritual subconscious of our mind. That's the worst form of enslavement. And this is the reason why we still suffer today, because they have taken away our black divinity. They have taken away our spiritual representation of our divinity. And then they looked at it and made us look at it as a negative, and all type of negative representation of black and early spirituality, because they know when they went into those tombs, what did they see? They know what they saw, but at the same time, they still ritualistically, secretly worship the Black Madonna. Mm-hmm. They worship in the Cell of the Vatican. They worship it in Rome. They worship it in Spain and Barcelona, okay, and Poland and all these different places. That's the secret, because they know that is the secret that the Romans, that became the Byzantine Romans Christians, and took it up out of Africa. So they secretly and ritualistically still worship that Black Madonna, who is the Theotokos, who she is the mother of God. Okay, she is the original, a set. And that's why in that movie, The Da Vinci Code, and they showed the movie, and then they connected it to a pagan and heathen. So they slipped that in there for the regular seers of the movie, just the regular people. But those who understood the sacred spiritual knowledge of Africa, they showed that Madonna to show that's the origin. This is the origin. This spirituality came up out of our ancestors countless thousands of years ago. And it was told in the books in stone. It came up out of Inner Africa, coming on up through Kush, to the Kushites, coming up into the Kemetic Africans of the Nile Valley, and documented right there on the temples. If it was supposed to be so pagan and heathen, then the question is, okay, why did they copy the same stories? These holy birth stories are spiritual stories that are told up and down the Nile. The oldest one, of course, is Asar, Set, and Haru, the earliest triad. Right there. We take groups in the back of the temple paper with soot. There you see the relief. 3,000 years ago. And here we see Amenhotep III, who's born of Immaculate Conception from his mother, Matanwea. And his spiritual father is Amen. Let's go to Zetzret and Zetzru, the most select and holy of places. I know some of us don't know these places. We know the Vatican. We know the Westminster Abbey. We know the Notre Dame. We know the Parthenon and all these places. But when I say Zetzret and Zetzru, what? So these are real places 3,000 years ago, long before these Western places existed. Let's go to the birthing colonnade of Makari Hatshepsut, where she's born of Immaculate Conception from her mother Atmos and her spiritual father Ben Amen. This is where these stories came from, telling of the holy birth and the Immaculate Conception. Let's go to the temple of Aset. Let's go up into the Mamizi house. Let's go and see where Aset had to hide in the bulrushes, because Set, the evil brother, of Asar, was out to kill Haru, who Aset gave birth of Immaculate Conception, because he feared he would grow up and avenge his father's death. Is this where they got the story where Jesus had to hide from Herod? Is this where they got the story where Moses equally had to hide in the bulrushes? Because the origin of the story, the prototype of the story, is Aset hiding in the papyrus swamp. That's carved in stone. It's right there. But yet, when some people go there and they don't go on educational programs for liberation, they say, "I didn't see that, Kwesi." But with many of those guides over there, some of them don't even know, and if some of them did know, they're not going to say anything because they conflict with their own religious beliefs. And there you go into the temple, and you see that symbol when you go into the temple of Haru. And there, let's go up into also the temple of Heru, where he's born in the chapel December the 25th, and they're their own tour books. Wow, such a curious thing. The resemblance, our festival of Christmas. Yeah, because you stole it. Where Haru is born in this manger, in this chapel, on exactly December the 25th. There is told. There in the temple of Haru, you see the Burdett, the sun disk wings. symbolizing Haru, who defeated Set, who had to know himself, representing the spiritual knowing thyself, the symbol of the Bredet. That is the symbol that's over all the temples, that now becomes what? Image and representation in a white anthropomorphic or human image. That becomes now the white angel with wings, with the sun behind her head. That is the Bredet. And I heard some Negroes on, I'm not on YouTube all the time, but people call me periodically, and had Negroes on there talking about, I went to Egypt, and Kwesi said, know thyself is on the temple. I looked everywhere. Fool, it's the Bredet above the temple. That not only did Kwesi said, Dr. Ben, Dr. George G.M. James, that is the Bredet of knowing thyself, the sun, this wind. That is the symbol of opening up the most spiritual place in the anatomy of the brain, which is the pineal gland, the seat of the soul. Activated by the sun to bring out spiritual consciousness to know thyself. And now its representation in white angelical Christianity as a little white female angel. But if we don't know the spiritual netaroos and we don't know the spiritual stories, this is why Kemet had to be anywhere but in Africa. Say it's called the Middle East. So if you got a Middle East, where's your Middle West? Where's your Middle North? Where's your Middle South? Oh, say extraterrestrials built this. Say anything, as long as you keep the black man's mind out of this fallopian tube of the now. You got archaeological research teams there, white archaeological research teams. You got everybody over there researching but us. We're talking about unlocking the spiritual stories. We're talking about looking at and studying. And yet you got different periods of the Medu Neter. You got what Petrie calls the pre-dynastic. You got the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom. So they wrote on all the temples endlessly. You got the 18th and 19th dynasty. And all of it cannot be interpreted, but there's a lot of it we can interpret. That's why when we go to Aptu, when we go to the kings list in the Temple of Seti I, you can see the 76 kings and their Medu Neter names that are right there on the Shinus. That's how we get the names. And we see ideas of Sa-Ra, as I said before, that means the son of God, Neb Kadu, Lord King of Kings, that now becomes in Revelations, the Lord King of Kings. And then we see the names, like the king's name, Ursa Ma'at Ra, Septepen Ra, Mesomori Amen, but we see part of his name is Septepen Ra. He is chosen by God. Is this where the Jews get God's chosen children from?
Wow.
On and on and on and on. But once we get into a spiritual consciousness, then we can transcend time and space. And I'm saying, but the foundation of it, one has got to at least start with a black divinity. One has at least got to have a black theology. So if we're Christians, at least one has definitely got to have a spiritual representation of their divinity, and Christianity is black. If one is a Hebrew, it's got to be a spiritual divinity and representation as black. If one is a Muslim, it's got to be a spiritual representation of the divinity and theology as black. Then we can travel. So if we can't even see that, then we can't transcend that time and space, because we're locked into this incarceration. I think it's the spiritual foundation that would pull all of us together in all these religious boxes. But even though Judaism, Christianity, Islam give credit to each other, none of them give credit to where they got the information from.
Mm-hmm.
Our children go to school and got to learn about these Greeks and all these here, Pythagoras. Where did he get his theorem from? Where did he get his hypotenuse from? That came from Kemet. Where did the Arabs learn a lot of this from when they came in, who the Romans were there before them, and they had access to some of the leftovers, that was plundered by the Europeans. This is how they came up with their algebra and everything, and all this other number system that now becomes associated with Arabic names, but not giving the Kemetic association, to it, even though the chemistry comes from the term Kemet, that literally means black again, the beginning of everything starting out of blackness. So, of course, someone hearing this, and I equally did not know, as I said before, going back to the beginning of what I said in the beginning of this program, Brother Rich, in 1973, when we were being shot down, my friend, been shot down by the Gestapo LAPD. My awakening came that when Wayusi was his name, and we were on our way to the Hollywood Bowl to see Earth, Wind, and Fire and Gil Scott-Heron. And he was shot for no reason. I'm sitting in the car. I should have been the one driving. And I asked Wayusi, did you hear that shot? And I looked over him, and blood is coming out of his chest. But what I want to say in relationship, and peace be upon Brother Wayusi, but the same thing is going on today as still was going on even back then and even before then. But what I saw was that when it was time for us to go into that spiritual realm, there's always these white representations of a white Jesus, okay, that we, in the church, and these images that we start to make, and I knew something was wrong. And that's when going back to when I heard Dr. Ben. And I said, this is what, at that time I was in a political struggle during that time, part of the Black Power movement. But I saw that our divinity was missing, our spiritual representation. This was, here we're fighting this beast out here, and now we got to go look at the same beast that's in these churches as God's son.
Yeah.
That was the awakening. That's the awakening that I awakened to, that started me on my journey, never knowing that I would spend 35 years non-stop. And all of us have a genius within us, but we can't become afraid of ourselves. Some of us are born and believe everything that we're told. And some of us are born and want to know that which has not been told. And we've got to understand that we are the unorganized truth fighting an organized lie. We're unorganized in everything we do. But the enemy is organized in everything he does. Even the knowledge that he's taken from Africa, he's organized with it because he knows that we are unorganized. So we've got the truth. The truth are on the monuments and temples, but it's unorganized. If it was organized, then we wouldn't let some Negro Sambo like Carter come out or Carson come out and say the pyramids were granary tombs and just say any old
crazy.
thing.
And Ben Carson,
Yeah, Ben Carson, just say any old thing. No other people are going to let people talk about their sacred monuments and temples and associated with extraterrestrials or something, or outside of this crazy stuff, only in Africa. You have the oldest and greatest structures like the Great Pyramid of Khufu. 7 million tons of masonry, 755 feet on each square, okay. 481 feet in height. I mean, the greatest structure on the planet Earth. No spacemen built it. The evolution of pyramids starts in the area of Saqqara, where you see the step pyramid, where Imhotep, the world's first multi-genius, built it for Xotaneteket, symbolically climbing the staircase to heaven that led into Huni and eventually Sneferu, who built the first true pyramid that led into his son, Khufu, that we're most familiar with his pyramid. This on the dollar bill, showing and indicating the symbolism of where the sacred knowledge and the Shishada, or the African spiritual mystery system, where it came from. Where the liberation of African people starts with opening up that African ancestral genetic memory bank. The denial of self, that is slavery. The reason why Europeans called us boys, Brother Rich, is because we didn't know nothing beyond the master. So he called us boys. And a man calls his son his boy because the son only knows his father. But the slave only knows his slave master. He doesn't know it. He was stripped of his history, his name, everything, his culture, okay, his spiritual way of life. So he was called a boy. We become men when we become masters of ourselves and our ancestral knowledge and master of our spiritual divinity and who we are as a people. Then we become a man. If one can only talk within the circumference of the European's diameter and only know that history, we are still boys.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the real reality because we're at a serious psychological warfare. And Europeans know it. They play on it all the time. They play on it and we don't even know they're playing on it. When we're watching television, there's psychological warfare going against our black divinity. There were billboards all over the country with our baby as a black child on a billboard with her hair up like a devil, and then a white little baby next to her. That was psychological spiritual warfare. To make that self-hatred be embedded deep within our people.
Right.
And then, so the point is, Africa, like I said, if one is a Christian, you can find deep African spirituality, okay, in Africa. You can go and see, we go to Ethiopia. We go to Ethiopia next month, where you have these monolithic churches that were built, and Europeans now in Lalibela. The church is built during the Zagwe dynasty, by Lalibela. Now they're trying to say whites built that. Don't want to give no credit to nothing that we have done on this planet. So in this presentation, which I'm most honored to come back on ancient African spirituality, the origin of Christianity, and the birth of the Black Christ, what did our ancestors have on these temples? This is what we're going to look at. Why did the Europeans do everything trying to chisel out black divinity that I'm going to show on the temples? Reveal the reliefs, deal with the information, and deal with the symbolism, so that way as this holiday starts to emerge on us, and as they indoctrinate us with twinkles and bells and whistles and lights and all this stuff, then we can start to understand what this is all about. And we can start to see our own spiritual representation without getting caught into the deification of Europeans in creating a white idolatry or the worship of white folks.
Beautiful, man.
You know what, Dr. Kwesi, it's good to see you have so much passion after doing this for so long in your work and how you talk, man. Like, you was on fire tonight, man. I'm definitely going to be in the building on November 22nd, man, but I definitely appreciate the passion that you maintain while you talking about this, man. I mean, I could feel your words, not just hear them, brother. So, blessings to you, brother, with this work that you do.
That passion, brother, comes out of many years of being out here on the battleground, fighting the beasts and fighting the slaves.
Indeed.
It was back on the plantation, brother. Everybody didn't want to run away. I mean, it's still on the books, drapetomania, the runaway slave, and now it's mental. So there's going to be mental slaves. There's many slaves today who are not going to run away. Okay, they're going to stay on the plantation. But there are many brothers and sisters during the time of the plantation who, even though they didn't run away. They wanted to run away. They thought about running away. So as long as we're thinking about it, brother, even that's good. Okay, the fact that we can think about running away. And that's what I'm saying, is that as long as we're caught up into this, that's, my passion comes out of many, many years of witnessing and seeing what our ancestors built there. And I don't think I would have the same passion if I had not witnessed it, or, and being with the Grand Master and, with him, working with him, okay, not just, knowing him, but working with him for 14 years, okay, and revealing the information and shocked myself, okay, and seeing the outright, theory, okay, of ancient African spiritual stories without question, one temple after another temple. So that's where that passion comes in at myself, okay. If I did not have that background, then it might be more of a intellectual approach, and that's why we've got the balance. We just can't be intellectual, because if somebody's down there kicking your mother, you're not going to intellectually try to talk about it. You're going to have some passion, and that passion is going to lead to you to fight to defend her. And that's why we've got to have the passion and the spirit and not let them turn us into intellectual robots. At the same time, making sure that we disseminate, to liberate. That's the main thing that we have to do. And we all have a piece. And I always try to say this. I said it the other night. I was on the radio show the other night, and I was really had my head clogged up a little bit, so my head is a lot more open now than it was yesterday when I was on Blue Pill And Red Pill's radio show, I had more of a clogged head, but, with these the weather changing and everything, so you caught me on a better spirit, my brother. But I was saying on their show that if I can use the analogy, and I try so we can understand it, it's like putting a mirror up to your face and you can see your face. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But if someone knocks that mirror out your hand and knocks on the ground and it breaks up into many pieces, that mirror that you once were able to see your face, you pick up one little piece, you can't see your face. Is that right?
Right.
You just see a piece of your face.
Piece, yeah.
All of us got a piece. And as long as we understand that, okay, this is impossible for one person to know all the information, and all of us are doing our various research, as long as we're doing it for our people and the liberation of our people, like your radio show. You decided to do a radio show. That's a community. Your dissemination of information for liberation. So this is good. This is your piece. Everybody has a piece. And once that person has researched their piece, and that piece can fit in with reconstructing our story as a people, then that's what we've got to do. Not take and look at somebody else's piece and then, start fighting with each other and then go to crazy ego madness come out of it. The pieces will never reconstruct. But as Dr. Clark said, take what you do best and do it for our people. So reconstructing the pieces, as long as it's for the liberation of African people and the reconstructing of our story, that piece will fit. But of course, if it's truly not about the liberation of and the freedom of our people, then the piece will not fit. So those of us who are coming together to research this knowledge, that it's going to take many, many lifetimes, to put these pieces together. So I'm just doing my piece within this span of time, and these 3 decades to me seems like it's only been 10 years. Once you start on this journey, there's no end to it. And then you realize the most precious thing that you got is time. And that's why a lot of times I make sure I don't let myself get caught up in the foolishness out here, because that's precious time that we really don't have. So we've got to take that time and realize just how precious our time is, and take that time in the liberation of our people. That's what we've got to do.
Leave the people some contact info if they're interested in going on to Kemet with you, or upcoming lectures or DVDs and books.
Right. Okay. Well, this now, of course, on the 22nd, I will be King Simon. That'll be, as you just mentioned, 570 Fulton Street, near Flatbush Avenue, exit Brooklyn. Okay. And let me give King Simon's number. That's 347-496-1022. And that will be the lecture on the African spirituality, or origin of Christianity, and the birth of the Black Christ visual documentation. And this weekend, those who are in the Trenton area of New Jersey, I will be there on the 15th at the Uhuru Village. And you can contact Brother Hannibal at 609-638-3859. We've got some serious warriors in that organization, but that's one of the numbers that one can contact, and that'll be this weekend, this Sunday on the 15th, and then the 22nd, of course, right there in Brooklyn, New York. So, again, this is information, especially this is a very critical time at this time of the year, and then our educational tours, you just mentioned, this will be July 16th to July 30th this year, our Kemet New Know Thyself educational tour that my wife and I, Ashra Kwesi, we do together. And that's a trip of a lifetime, and we definitely put it together for a trip of a lifetime. One can go to our website, and that's kemetnu.com. That's spelled KEMETNU.com. And you can print out the brochure, or if you're interested in getting DVDs, where I don't work in the system. I had to liberate myself many years ago. Dr. Ben said you got to keep your tongue free. So fortunately, brothers and sisters have supported us out here. And you can get the DVDs on the origin of Christianity, as well as many other subjects, when you go to the website. And then our Ethiopian tour, actually we're leaving at the end of next month. That's an annual trip that we do every winter, and that'll be December the 28th to January 8th. Okay, so that'll be our Ethiopian, the land where humanity began. That's our educational program that we do at that time. So there's many other lectures coming up in December in L.A. and other places around the country, but those are the two just near where you are, right there in the New York area. And looking forward to coming back for an African University to educate, to liberate.
Indeed. All right, y'all. Well, I look forward to seeing you on November 22nd. I will definitely be in the building, Dr. Kwesi. And
yes,
thank you.
Introduce yourself, brother. Definitely like to meet you, and honored to be on your radio show and keep up the great work, because we got to keep the airways open. We know there's a lot of airways and bookstores, and a lot of things are shutting down. You know, I mean, when the enemy attacks, they shut down the communication. So it's an honor that you have these airways to help educate the people.
Indeed. And on that note, this is Brother Richard, Underground Railroad Radio with Dr. Ashra Kwesi. Make sure you're there November 22nd, Ancient African Spirituality, the lecture in Brooklyn, New York. And on that note, we are signing out, and we'll see you next time. Peace, family.
What's up, my brother? Peace.
All right.